Hey everyone, this is Nicole with Metabolic Intelligence from Oval. We break down the science of your metabolic system so you can feel better, move with purpose, and make sense of what's happening inside your body. We're joined by Dylan, an exercise physiologist and strength and conditioning specialist who trained professional athletes, celebrities, and executives for more than 25 years. All right, Dylan, today's topic. We're going to talk about fats and carbs. Because I know for me that every time I go to work out, I'm like, gotta burn those carbs, gotta burn those carbs. And now everybody's starting to talk about fat. Why are we talking about carbs and now talking about fat? What is the difference? Tell me what's going on.
There's a few things going on here, right? There's carbs and fat that you ingest as part of your diet, and then there's carbs and fats that your body has to use once they've been processed as part of the energy units that it uses to power your body. And there's some overlap there, but they're also not. It's not like you eat this thing and it becomes immediately available to you for energy. There's a lot of processes that have to take place between those 2 points. So I think when people were talking about burning fats and burning carbohydrates for energy, they're talking about what's already present then in their body. So there's just a lot of education that's necessary for people to understand really what's going on here.
Okay, but aren't fats and carbs both bad, or are they both good? Like I thought, like you want to reduce the amount of fat, you don't want to eat a lot of carbs, but what I'm hearing you say is really your body needs both for energy.
They're just vehicles for energy. And, your body is designed to be able to use both of those things for really different specific reasons. So, it's set up so that you should be able to use fat for energy for most activities. Low level activities, maintaining day-to-day processes, you should be using fat for fuel. Fat is super energy dense and we can store it indefinitely. It makes sense that your body would be using that as its baseline energy source. And then you've got carbohydrates, which are less energy dense than fats are, but they can be turned into usable energy a lot faster. So there's a trade-off going on here. And anytime you're going to start pursuing an activity that reaches an intensity level that for your body requires faster energy, your body is going to switch to carbohydrates as its preferred fuel source.
So somebody who's not an exercise physiologist, what does that mean? Like what level of activity would I have to do to get carbs to burn versus what level of activity would I do to have burn fat?
I think that's what's so tricky is that that's different for everybody. And unless you're going to measure exactly at what level of intensity your body has to start converting over to carbohydrates for energy versus being able to stay in fat utilization, you're only really guessing.
Well, that's not helpful at all.
No, and that's part of the confusion, I think, in health and wellness right now is that people are looking for answers to these questions, that there are not a lot of great answers out there available to most people, especially when we're just talking about general populations. Elite athlete populations are doing things like VO2 max testing to learn that information and then turn that into an exercise or a training program that is going to optimize their performance. Most of us don't have access to a metabolic cart or a laboratory setting where these things have typically taken place up until now. We just don't really know exactly at what level am I burning fat for fuel or are you burning fat for fuel unless we both check using a biomarker and figuring out what do those turning points look like.
So, but with Oval, I can measure my metabolic system and you can measure your metabolic system and we can be totally different.
It could be very, very different. And you can't look at people and make any assumptions either that they're healthy or unhealthy. That's why, this testing process is so important. And we can't really make any changes to anything that we aren't measuring. It's important to, do a test like this to figure out where you're starting from and then figuring out what am I going to do about it? I think there's a lot of information available to people now that's great to know, but they don't always know how to take that information and do something practical with it to make positive changes. And that's what the Oval program is designed for, to take information with a high level of accuracy and then turn that into practical exercise training programs that are designed to increase the health of your metabolism. For some people, like they may be out of fat utilization, even just like with a slow walk if they're that out of shape. Sitting here right now, having this conversation, we're really depending on fat for, fat to power our bodies. If I have to get up and run to the mailbox, that's probably going to ask a level of demand of me that I have to switch to carbohydrates.
So what if I run a marathon? What does that ask of me?
Well, if you're a really good marathon runner, for most of that race, you're still using fat for fuel. And that's why they can go for so much longer. That's why you can watch these guys in the Tour de France like cycle in the mountains for hours at a time and they can keep going because they're still using fat for fuel for most of that portion of the race. And then maybe that last sprint where they're really pushing, they're tapping into carbohydrates for, extra level of demand. But for most of that time, they're still burning fat, doing something even at that high level of intensity.
So what would that look like for, like us non-Tour de France people? Can you give me some examples of like when I would burn fat versus when I would burn carbs? We're always burning both, right?
Well, yes and no. If I'm sprinting, I'm probably burning zero fat. If I'm pushing the upper end of my performance like that, I'm probably exclusively burning carbohydrates. We can sit here and have this conversation and be burning fat for fuel in all likelihood. And if a bear crashes into the room and I've got to get out of here as fast as possible, my body is going to depend on carbohydrates in a fight or flight situation.
So really, carbs aren't bad. Fat isn't bad. You need both to fuel your body, to get through your day, to have energy, to have life, to live, have health.
This is a super confusing topic for people, which is why they keep selling a lot of books about it. And they just cycle through, this fat based diet, and then they go back to this carbohydrate based diet and this fat based diet. And every time enough time has elapsed, they can sell somebody something they haven't heard before, or a new take on something that hasn't been around for a while. If you're taking in more than you need, you're going to get fatter. And if you're only taking in what you're going to use, you're going to maintain a healthy weight.
The takeaway for today is going to be you need both fats and carbs to live.
Neither one of them was bad. I think it would be great to dispel some more of those ideas that you're gonna get fat if you eat carbs, or you're gonna get fat if you eat fat. Like you're gonna get fat if you eat too much of anything.
So don't have cake every day. Got it.
Minimize the cake.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us today. As always, if there's any topics you'd like us to cover, please feel free to submit them to social@oval.care and stay tuned for our next podcast.